There is something almost cinematic about the way tennis occasionally hands us a rivalry that feels bigger than the sport itself. And when the draw for the 2026 United Cup was released, and fans saw that Great Britain had landed in the same group as Japan, the internet did not need a press release to understand what that meant. Because it meant that Emma Raducanu, the 23-year-old former U.S. Open champion who spent years fighting to recapture the magic of her fairy tale 2021 run, was going to walk onto the same court as Naomi Osaka, the four-time Grand Slam champion whose career has been one of the most scrutinized, most humanized, and most closely followed journeys in modern sport. And almost instantly, tennis media outlets, fan forums, betting sites, and casual scrollers who could not have named 5 other players on the WTA Tour started buzzing about a match that had not even happened yet. Because these are 2 names that carry weight far beyond their current rankings. 2 players whose stories intersect in strange and compelling ways, even though their actual head-to-head history is remarkably thin. And to understand why this fixture generated so much noise, you have to go back and trace both of their arcs separately before you can appreciate why the collision point mattered so much to so many people. Started with Naomi Osaka, who burst onto the global stage in 2018 when she defeated Serena Williams in a U.S. Open final that became infamous not for her brilliant, composed tennis, but for the chaos that erupted around her, a final that should have been a coronation, and instead became a lesson in how cruel the spotlight can be to a 20-year-old who had just achieved the dream of her life, only to be booed by a crowd that was not booing her at all. And Osaka handled that moment with a grace that immediately signaled she was different, that she possessed both a ferocious game built on a monstrous serve, a flat, penetrating forehand that could end points in a blink, and also a fragile, deeply human interior life that she was never afraid to show the world. And over the next 2 years, she would go on to win 3 more majors: the 2019 Australian Open, the 2020 US Open, and the 2021 Australian Open, establishing herself as the most dominant hardcourt player of her generation, and briefly the top-ranked woman on the planet, a status that came a level of fame that very few athletes, let alone tennis players, ever experience, because Osaka was not just winning tournaments. She was becoming a genuine global icon, gracing magazine covers, becoming the face of major sponsorship campaigns worth tens of millions of dollars, and using her platform to speak out on racial justice during the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020 by wearing 7 masks bearing the names of 7 black victims of police violence through her 7 matches at the U.S. Open, a gesture that turned her into far more than an athlete in the eyes of millions. But underneath that success was a battle that the public did not fully see until 2021, when Osaka withdrew from the French Open after announcing she had been struggling with depression and anxiety around media obligations, a decision that split opinion at the time between those who felt she was letting down the sport's traditions and those who recognized her honesty as a watershed moment for how elite athletes talk about mental health. And in hindsight, that moment looks less like controversy and more like the beginning of a new, more compassionate conversation about what we ask of young superstars, a conversation that Osaka herself kept pushing forward even as her results became inconsistent, as she skipped Wimbledon, dealt with injuries, took an extended break from the sport in 2023 to have her first child, and returned in 2024 as a mother trying to rebuild her ranking and her game almost from scratch, a comeback story that has been slower and more grinding than anyone expected from someone who once looked untouchable on hard courts, but one that has shown flashes of the old ruthlessness. Enough that by the time the 2026 season began, she had climbed back into the top 20 and was widely regarded as one of the most dangerous floaters in any draw, a player who could beat anyone on a good day, even if consistency across a full season still eluded her. And it is worth pausing here to really sit with what her comeback represents, because comebacks in women's tennis after childbirth are still rare enough that every one of them gets treated as a referendum on whether motherhood and elite competition can coexist, and Osaka has essentially become a walking answer to that question, showing up to tournaments with her daughter often nearby, talking openly about the exhaustion and the joy and the strange dual identity of being both a mother and a professional athlete chasing history. And that duality is part of what makes her return so compelling to watch, because every match now carries a subtext that simply was not there in her first run to the sport, back when she was just a supremely talented young woman with the world's expectations on her shoulders, whereas now she's a supremely talented older, wiser woman carrying different expectations, her own included, And on the other side of this particular rivalry sits Emma Raducanu, whose story is in some ways an even more extreme version of the same phenomenon. Because Raducanu did not build to stardom over several years the way Osaka did. She detonated into it in the space of about 2 weeks in September 2021, when an 18-year-old British qualifier who had never played a full season on tour, who had been ranked outside the top 300 just months earlier, who had only recently finished her A-level exams, walked through qualifying and then through the main draw of the U.S. Open without dropping a single set, becoming the first qualifier in the Open era to win a Grand Slam. Singles title and doing it as a teenager in front of a global audience that had never heard her name before the tournament started, and the scale of that achievement cannot really be overstated. Because tennis simply does not produce stories like that, a run so improbable and so complete that it briefly made Raducanu one of the most famous athletes on the planet overnight, with the kind of instant, blinding fame that very few people, let alone teenagers, are equipped to absorb without consequence. And almost immediately, the conversation around her shifted from how did she do this to can she do it again? A question that has hovered over every single one of her matches for 4 years since, an unfair but unavoidable shadow cast by the sheer magnitude of that first triumph. And what followed was a run of injuries, coaching changes, expectations that outpace her actual match toughness at that stage of her career, and a media environment in the UK that scrutinizes her every outfit choice, every retirement from a match, every press conference answer with an intensity that few other 20-something athletes in the world are subjected to. And through all of that, Raducanu has had to essentially rebuild her career in public, working her way back up the rankings, dealing with wrist and ankle surgeries, parting ways with multiple coaches as she searched for the right voice in her corner, and slowly, unevenly, finding her footing again, showing in flashes, like her run to the 4th round of the 2023 Australian Open or strong performances against elite competition in 2024 and 2025, that the talent which won her that U.S. Open title had never actually gone anywhere. It was simply buried under the weight of expectation and the physical toll of playing through injuries that a more experienced body might have handled better. And by the time 2026 arrived, Raducanu was a different competitor than the wide-eyed 18-year-old who shocked the world, more battle-tested, more comfortable with the media circus around her, still searching for that signature deep run at a major that would prove the 2021 title was not a lightning-in-a-bottle fluke, but the first chapter of a genuinely great career. And it is against this backdrop that the idea of an Osaka-Raducanu match becomes so magnetic, because these are two players whose careers are mirror images of a very particular modern athletic experience. Both won a Grand Slam as teenagers or very young adults in dramatic, headline-grabbing fashion. Both became instant global brands worth many multiples of their on-court prize money. Both have had to publicly navigate the gap between a version of themselves that exists in the public imagination and the version of themselves that has to show up and hit a tennis ball under enormous pressure. And both have spent years since their breakthrough moments trying to prove that they belong at the top of the sport on merit and consistency, not just on the strength of one unforgettable fortnight. And when you put those two narratives on a collision course, even in something like the United Cup, a team competition that many purists consider secondary to the 4 majors, you get a match that transcends its actual context. And that is exactly what happened when the draw revealed that these two would meet in the very first match of Great Britain's 2026 campaign against Japan in Perth, a fixture immediately circled by fans and media as one of the most anticipated non-major matches of the entire season. And the build-up only intensified when their limited head-to-head history got dug up and passed around. Because prior to the scheduled meeting, the two had played exactly once, in the summer of 2025 at the Mubadala City DC Open in Washington, a hard-court tournament where Raducanu came through in straight sets, 6-4, 6-2, a result that gave the Britain bragging rights heading into 2026 and added a layer of intrigue to the rematch. Because Osaka, despite her superior overall resume and higher current ranking around world number 16 at the time, compared to Raducanu sitting closer to 29, had something to prove against a player who had gotten the better of her in their only previous meeting. And Raducanu, for her part, spoke to the press in the lead-up about how much respect she had for both Osaka and her other group stage opponent Maria Sakkari, describing the upcoming matches as very difficult despite her head-to-head edge, a comment that reflected the genuine competitive uncertainty around the fixture rather than any false modesty. because anyone who watches modern women's tennis knows that a single prior result means very little when two players of this caliber step onto a fresh court with a whole season stretching out in front of them, and the stage in Perth was set perfectly for a spectacle, the United Cup's mixed team format, lending an extra layer of national pride and atmosphere to what would already have been a magnetic individual matchup, with Great Britain's team captain Tim Henman overseeing a squad built around Raducanu and Jack Draper as their headline acts against a Japanese team led by Osaka, making her United Cup debut. And fans who had circled the fixture on their calendars for weeks were primed for a genuine clash of styles. Osaka's flat, explosive, first strike power built to end points quickly with minimal rallying, against Raducanu's cleaner, more counter-punching baseline game that thrives on taking the ball early and redirecting pace, a stylistic contrast that pundits have been previewing for days, with several outlets even publishing detailed predictions suggesting Osaka's firepower would likely prove decisive if she was serving well, projecting her to win in straight sets and predicting she would rack up well over 20 winners against Raducanu, who had been dealing with some physical concerns heading into the new season. And that last detail turned out to be the twist nobody wanted, because in the days leading up to the match, reports emerged that Raducanu had picked up a lightly bruised bone in her right foot, an issue serious enough that she had already withdrawn from a couple of scheduled exhibition matches in the United States before the United Cup even began, a decision she made specifically because she did not want to risk aggravating anything right at the very start of the season that, for her, always builds toward the biggest goal of all, a strong showing at the Australian Open just weeks later. And so when the moment finally arrived, the match that had been billed for weeks as the clash everyone was waiting for did not happen the way anyone had scripted it. Because on the day, with a foot injury still a lingering concern, Raducanu made the difficult call to withdraw from the individual singles match against Osaka, prioritizing her long-term health and her Australian Open preparation over playing through discomfort in what was ultimately a team event rather than a Grand Slam. And great Britain's captain Tim Henman told reporters afterward that Raducanu had actually been very close to playing, that the decision came down to the wire, and that he was not ruling her out of the rest of the tournament, framing it as a precautionary step rather than a serious setback. But for the neutral fans who have been waiting for this exact collision of storylines, the announcement landed like a deflating balloon, because instead of Osaka versus Raducanu, tennis audiences got Osaka versus Katie. Swan, Raducanu's substitute. And while Swan is a perfectly credible professional in her own right, nobody had spent weeks building hype around that particular matchup, and Osaka made quick, efficient work of the situation, defeating Swan 7-6 in a tight first-set tiebreak, followed by a much more comfortable 6-1 second set, a scoreline that suggested Osaka's game was rounding into competitive shape early in the season, even without the marquee opponent she'd been expecting. And, interestingly, despite Osaka's straightforward singles win, the overall tie did not go Japan's way, because Great Britain's other rubbers, the men's singles and the mixed doubles, went the Brits' way, giving Great Britain a 2-1 overall victory in the tie, even with their most famous face sitting out the singles match against Osaka, a result that meant Great Britain moved on with momentum in the group phase, while Japan's tournament debut ended on a mixed note, a strong individual performance from their captain undermined by a team result that slipped away in the other matches. And so the so-called clash everyone was waiting for technically became a footnote rather than a headline, would have instead an instant classic. And in the days following the withdrawal, speculation immediately turned toward whether the two could still meet later in the tournament if both teams advanced deep enough into the knockout stages, since the United Cup format includes group play, followed by quarterfinals, semifinals, and a final stage in Sydney, meaning there was theoretically a path for Osaka and Raducanu to cross paths again before the tournament concluded, though such a scenario would have required specific results to align in the draw. And regardless of whether that rematch materialized, what the whole sequence of events really illustrated was something deeper about both of these players' current chapters, because Raducanu's decision to prioritize her body over a marketable headline matchup reflects the more mature, self-protective approach she has developed since the injury-riddled seasons that followed her U.S. Open miracle, an approach built on hard lessons about what happens when you push through pain in pursuit of a moment rather than in pursuit of a season, and Osaka's willingness to step onto court and deliver a clean, professional win against a replacement opponent without any hint of deflation or distraction reflects the steadier, more battle-hardened competitor she has become since returning from maternity leave. Someone who has learned to take care of business in front of her regardless of who is standing across the net. And if you zoom out even further, the entire episode is a pretty perfect encapsulation of what covering modern tennis often feels like. A sport where narrative and hype can build enormous anticipation around a fixture only for realities of a long, physically brutal season, full of niggling injuries and difficult scheduling decisions to intervene and rewrite the story at the last minute. And yet the anticipation itself was not misplaced. Because everything about these two players, their similar origin stories as young Grand Slam champions thrust into global fame, their contrasting but equally compelling games, their parallel journeys of rebuilding and reinvention after the initial explosion of stardom, their shared status as two of the most talked about names in the sport regardless of where. They currently sit in the rankings, means that whenever they do finally share a match court for a full, healthy, competitive contest, whether that comes later in this United Cup at the Australian Open or at some other tournament down the line, is going to draw exactly the kind of attention the scheduled meeting drew. Because some matchups simply carry a magnetism that outlasts any single missed date. And Osaka versus Raducanu is very clearly one of those matchups, a rivalry still mostly unwritten on paper, with just a single meeting on the record books currently favoring Raducanu, but one that fans, broadcasters, and the players themselves clearly understand carries weight far beyond a solitary head-to-head statistic, because it represents two of the most compelling comeback stories currently unfolding in women's tennis. Two athletes who know exactly what it feels like to win the biggest prize the sport has to offer before you are fully ready for what comes next. And two, competitors who are both, in their own very different ways, still trying to write the second act of careers that started with some of the most explosive first chapters the sport has ever seen. And that is really the story underneath the story here. Not just did Osaka beat Raducanu or did the match get canceled, but what does it mean to become a legend before you turn 20? And what does the rest of your career look like once the whole world already knows your name? And both of these women are answering that question in real time, on hard court around the world, match by match, comeback by comeback. And whatever happens the next time their names appear on the same schedule, you can be certain the anticipation will build all over again, because this is a rivalry defined less by frequency and more by weight, less by a long, bitter history, and more by the sense that every single time these two are drawn together, something meaningful about the state of women's tennis right now is on full display. The fragility and resilience of young stardom, the long road back from injury and burnout, the particular pressure of being a former champion trying to become a repeat champion, and the simple, timeless drama of two brilliant, complicated, deeply human competitors circling each other, waiting for the moment when the match finally fully happens.